In all seriousness, like from both of your side, and Sarah, obviously you can talk from like a family perspective, but like seriously, what does that do to your mental health? Like, what did it do?
Do you want me to go on this one first?
Either.
Okay. Either of us. I think we were having a bit of a laugh and a joke there, but the reality of this, if you're sat at home, and I'm going to speak very personally about my experience, I suppose, sat at home, that when your partner or your loved one is in custody, they are surrounded by other people in custody, and even if you're unlucky enough to be there on an IPP, you're likely to have other IPPs around you at some point inside there. At home, it's totally different. You haven't got this whole bunch of people around you who are there to support you or do anything. And in my experience, because I felt so awful for what was happening to Rob, I kind of almost ghosted through what was happening to me. I just put it to one side, like, I've got to keep strong, I've got to keep going, because the problem when you're on an IPP is you're waiting to do a course, and then you've done that course, so then you're waiting, right, I'm now prepping to go for boards, I'm going to put in for my papers, etc., and go that. There's just a constant spinning. Dates are so important because you haven't got a date. You kind of try to look for a date for something that you're working towards, so you're giving yourself targeted goals. And for me, each time something was coming up, and he'd be waiting for it, and the delays that come with that, which, unfortunately, part of the system is that it gets delayed. Everything's getting delayed all the time. That frustration, and I can hear his frustration, if I dropped in what it was doing to me, that would just add more pressure to him. So therefore, it's sort of absorbed by me. And I thought I was doing a really great job of it. I wasn't, but I thought I was doing a really great job of it because I'm keeping it really insular. I'm sort of like, right, I can't let him see what's happening to me because that's going to upset him. I don't let my kids see what's going on because that's going to upset them. And I've got to work, and I've got to keep going, and I've got to be this, that, and the other. But my coping mechanism was always to be busy. Right? If I'm busy, then I can't, no one can stop me. I'm just going to keep going. But you can't remain busy 24/7 all the time. There is elements of the time when you do find yourself by yourself, alone. If anyone's had someone inside, that the cut-off times on prison phones, to the minute.
They vary,
and it's like, bang, there goes that phone call down. You know that you're not allowed to speak to that person, talking about jobs. If they've not got a great job and they've got credit on, you're not going to speak to them for a few more days. That's really horrible, having that waiting inside there. And that process of being messed about constantly has such a psychological impact on family members outside because your hands are tied. If there was ever a sort of, you said before about carrots and sticks, I would say it's just constantly widening the goalposts. You do one thing and then it's something else. And no matter what you do, you're constantly having to achieve to do something else with no real understanding of how that's going to play out for you. It's not like if someone says, if you do this, this and this, you go to your parole board and you will be released. Yeah. You'll do this, this and this. You'll go to your parole board and then you've got to see how it goes.
And then there's further recommendations, or it's either open conditions, as Andy said, or potentially released, but it always seems like there's something else, right?
Yeah.
What was your experience? What does it do for your mental health?
Do you know what? I mean, I make light of some of the stuff, but the reality is that early on I had suicidal ideation, and I attempted to take my life, and obviously, I'm here, so I obviously didn't succeed, but I struggled, I really struggled. And I watched other people deteriorate. I watched, not literally, but I saw other people who are no longer with us.
That's emotional, man.
And I didn't forgive the authorities for some of the things that I saw. So I'm not only battling my own mental health, I'm also battling the system, and I'm battling to get out. And I remember the real asinine kind of assertion from a probation officer once that wrote in a report. I couldn't believe it when I read this report, and in this report it said Mr. Morris is only motivated to get out of prison. Well, no, Sherlock.
Obviously.
Sorry.
No, straight, I'm with you, obviously.
Of course I want to get out of prison, and so I struggled, and so I got to a point with my mental health where when I was reading dossiers when they were disclosed to me, so my first parole hearing should have been in 2009. It didn't take place until 2012, 5 years after my original sentence.
Wow.
And so I got this thick dossier and I read every bit of it and I started highlighting and, kind of putting little notes in so that I could deal with points, because there were things in it that I felt were not fair and not true.
Talking about parole, where you mentioned parole, like people that are eligible for parole are people on sentences that are either IPP, recall,
yes,
or this new EPP thing they have, or another sentence that is, where you have a tariff, right, and then once they've done their tariff or however long the judge stipulates, they're up for a parole hearing, which is done independently of the prison, right?
Yes.
Which is the parole board, and that's who makes a decision whether they make recommendations for them to do more courses, more programs, or either get open released or actually get released. So then let's talk about when you do gain your parole and it's a positive one and you get released. What's it like?
I was bursting with fruit flavour.
Just me.
I felt kind of excited, but when I got released in 2019, I remember really quite clearly, because they came to me the day before I signed the license. I was like, yep, we're good to go. And then I'm walking down the road. And when I was walking down the road, it was still a little bit surreal. But it was, I was elated. I kind of made a beeline for a certain fast food joint and said, look, make it snappy. I've waited a long time for this.
Yeah.
And then also, let's touch on recall, because that's a massive worry, when you're... How did you feel
with
about
that hanging over your head?
You know what? It's still a worry now, because the thing is, it could be for absolutely anything. I mean, if I was to, not that I would do it, but if I was to, I don't know, fare evade and get on a bus without paying, for me that would lead to recall. Whereas for somebody else, an ordinary person,
it's a fine.
It's a fine. It's a go and top up your oyster and behave yourself. But it's a real
crazy. That must make you watch every little single thing you do.
Yeah, no, it
like
does.
Down to a T.
It really does.
What does that do to you?
I'm acutely aware of it every single day, but I just try to manage it and just keep it moving. I focus these days. You see, the problem is, one of the things that a really good friend of mine used to say in prison is he used to say, look, be really careful who you hang out with, because if you're hanging out with 9 negative people, guess who's going to come number 10? Yeah. So for me, one of the things I try to do is really focus on the joy rather than the pain, just really focusing on the good stuff. And some really good stuff has happened for me since I've been out and about. And that kind of casts the whole recall spectre to the back of my mind rather than to the forefront.
Tell us about, so you're actually both part of Ungrip, right? So tell us about what that is and what you guys are up to now. Tell us about these positive things that are making you forget about recall.
We're just out there, aren't we? Just trying to do what we can. So Ungrip looks like it's this really huge organisation, when actually
it feels massive.
But that's driven by the fact that there's people inside it who have got lived experience, have been impacted by it, and that lived experience will drive you like nothing else will drive you in your life. If you want change, you've got to live that change. You've really just put a force on it. So we take on board the family's impact, as well as people who are inside custody as well, and we support people who are sat inside trying to get out, with family members who are sat inside trying to for them to get out, and also people upon their release as well. Recall is an unbelievable stress, an unbelievable pressure, and we're trying through parliamentary process to actually get a change. So people who are on this sentence, which is never ending, it feels like, can be resentenced. So if they were resentenced to a sentence that is no worse...
Determinate.
Determinate. So there's a start and an end date. Then that would totally move this system. There are so many people that are trapped inside on IPP. There are people who are 10 years over tariff. So that's 10 years over what you were originally sentenced to, 10 years past that. There's people who are 15 years over tariff. There's people who have done 17, 18 years and never been released. It's shocking, and they're trapped inside that system. And the changes that we're going through with Ungrip at the moment, obviously there was the Justice Select Committee report that came out, which we obviously contributed towards, and the recommendations of that, which we were really pleased about. So I have to say, you know, there's such a lack of trust for the government when you've been absolutely turned over by it. Your trust is really difficult to do, but that cross-party was the strongest thing I think that's happened to IPP since it was abolished. And it was like, right, okay, it recognised the impact that it had, the huge impact it had on people's mental health. It recognised the damage it was causing. It recognised that the system was broke. It recognised that the only way to solve this was to re-sentence. It recognised it was removing hope. And these recommendations were put forward. Unfortunately, it was not taken on by the government, which meant that, again, the hopes of people that are on this sentence and their families are yet again dashed. And that's, you know, one of my phrases that I use a lot when I'm talking is, hope is a dangerous commodity. And you trade in hope, you know, but it's dangerous because hope, unfortunately, doesn't always come through.
That's true.
And I think a lot of the time you're hoping for parole date, you're hoping to be released, you're hoping for something, you're constantly hoping for something, and you're not getting it. And then to have something so big like the Justice Select Committee report come out, and then to find out that actually the recommendations were that they were going to implement a new action plan, which anyone who has been on IPP, what are your thoughts on the action plan, Andrew? The previous action plans that have been in place, have they worked?
No. Is
we'll
the short answer.
We just have a new one. What we'll do is we'll recreate the action plan that's failed consistently, but it's okay, we'll recreate that action plan. So there's a lot of resentment by campaigners and family members and people stuck inside around that. So as Ungrip, we're trying to implement those changes and push them through while supporting people as well. And, you know, I think what the other thing, you know, Andrew and I sat up here today and we're talking, obviously Andrew can speak for himself and he's got links with his family. Robert had me, but there's people, if you're sat inside custody and you've been moved around the country, you've lost hope, you've lost contact. Who's your voice?
So at the time of this recording, Alex Chalk, who's the Justice Secretary, last week announced that they're now taking resentencing off the table. However, he is happy to reduce the 10-year license period review down to 5 or potentially lower. These are his words. How do you react to that?
I'm disappointed, I've got to be honest, but not entirely shocked. I think that there was a real opportunity to go a little bit further, and he does acknowledge that potentially that, you know, there might be room to go a bit further. The reality is, will he have the broad enough shoulders to do that? I think it's a shame because there are lots of people still languishing now. The amount of recalls is just ridiculous. When it needs to end. It really needs to end. You know, in a year, 2 years' time, I don't want to still be campaigning about this. I really don't, because this is one of those, I hate to, steal it, but, it's a real stain on our system. One of the things that we used to say in the bin, as we call it, is the only consistent thing about this was inconsistency. And it's still inconsistent. And it needs, I lost track of the amount of Justice Secretaries that have been in office in the time that I was banged up. But nobody would take any responsibility. The only person really that started to make some headway, and don't get me wrong, I'll give Alex Chalk, some credit because he's gone a little bit further than anybody else has been willing to so far, with the exception of Ken Clark who in 2012 started this rehabilitation revolution, and I got really excited. I was like, right, I'm going home any minute now. Any minute now. Any minute now.
2013.
And it just didn't come, and then he lost his job, and I was just like,
but that was like the beginning. Ken Clark, and that was the beginning of all, at the time, the cross-party talks.
That's right.
This this IPP thing, they've admitted that, it didn't go to plan, and it was a mistake now.
And been deemed inhumane.
Exactly. And obviously, Lord David Blunkett, who was Home Secretary at the time, has admitted that too. So we thought it was quite important to just play what his message is to serving IPP prisoners at the moment and to their families. So what he had to say, and here's what he had to say.
Firstly, don't give up. Please don't give up. There is a tomorrow, and outside prison, people are working on it. Secondly, please contact your own Member of Parliament before and after the general election, if you're not out by then. Please keep in touch. They have the resources I don't have. So please be in touch with the member of the Parliament for the constituency in which you previously resided. They have an obligation as an MP, or an elected member, to take up your case and to bring pressure to bear on the Secretary of State. And thirdly, by all means, keep in touch with the campaigners. They're doing their best. And there are different approaches from different campaign groups, but they're all working to the same end. And those of us in Parliament, in the Lords, will continue raising our voices and trying to hold the government to account for resolving these issues.
I just see, Andy, you're getting a bit... Sorry, Andrew, I'm seeing you get a bit emotional there. What do you think about that message there? Is there anything you add to that?
I thought I was hiding my emotion quite well. I was getting emotional because I was thinking about the people that are not going to make it out. I was thinking about particular individuals who have taken their lives, people that I knew, whose families don't have any hope. But, I suppose the reverse side of that coin is that there is some tangible advice and guidance there.
Would you add anything to that?
Not really, except that, yes, we have to bring pressure to bear on the Justice Secretary and the government. But sometimes I just wonder, I don't know, I have to make light of stuff when I'm feeling really emotional. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember a cartoon called Batfink. He had this wings like a shield of steel. It's like these guys have got Teflon wings. It's like, when it comes to this stuff, they just kind of cover up and, nothing penetrates the wings. And I think we have to get beyond this. I think that, enough is enough now.
And Sarah, what would you add to that message? What would you add to those because this is being played inside prison as well as on the outside? What would your message be to?
I think I echo what Andrew said. Unfortunately for Ungrip, there's a very personal connection to someone losing their own life on this sentence, and it's a very big part of how we're driven. And that we were talking outside before about how you drive and you keep campaigning when sometimes things are not going your way. And both Andrew and I and Rob and other people who are still around on this sentence have got some hope of one yay moment out of this. But for people who've lost someone, that moment's gone. Nothing's going to change that. And I acknowledge that Lord Blunkett has acknowledged his mistakes. The irony is, if you acknowledge we're asking, he's acknowledged his mistakes, we ask people to acknowledge the mistakes that Andrew's made, Rob's made, and anyone else has put aside. If you do that and you're trying to do something to make that better, then that we see that as a positive step. And I think asking people to just keep going, it's a big ask. They've been keeping going now for a very, very, very long time. And like we said, there's people who've unfortunately found that they can't keep going. And they need to have something that is a positive, something to hold on to that's tangible, something to prove that's that. And we talk about resentencing's off the table, right? And then we talk about...
For now, let's hope. For now.
And we are always hopeful, and we will always campaign relentlessly. Resentencing is the answer to this, and everyone knows resentencing is the answer to this. There's no grey area on this. Yeah. It's the answer. This will fix this problem. And we wouldn't have to release everyone all at once. You know, so many people would do that. But
Yeah, that's what they're talking about. One of what Alex Chalk said was like mass release, but you would...
There would never be a mass release.
Yeah, you can do it in a process where step by step.
You could do it on people who, whatever tariff they're on and how they're on the site, you could do it. And do you know what? I feel strongly I can speak for an awful lot of people that we've spoken to at Ungrip, and I know, I think if you're caught up in this system, if someone said to you, you know, you're going to have to wait another 12 months, but this is what you're going to get 12 months. So many people would snap that because they've 100%. Never had that. They've never had that.
Yeah.
But you know, when we're talking about things like dropping the licence, and I really have a rant about this revoke of licence, because you're at the point now, aren't you, when you can come to that point. Rob met the point. So obviously on IPP, I don't know whether everyone's aware of this, after 10 years from your first release, you can apply to have your licence revoked. The process is you have to be supported by a probation officer. An application goes in. It's then assessed like a parole board, and then you're knocked back or you're given that out. A lot of people have been eligible for it. Only a few people in relation have actually got that so far. The system changed last July to make it an automatic 10 point. Yeah. Now this so happened to coincide when Rob was 6 months after his 10-year mark. And as I said, you know, when you've got people who are very proactive, who understand how to operate maybe differently inside systems and are willing to take it on, and they'll go and speak for you, that's great. Rob had me in his corner and the people that we knew through Ungrip, and that's it. It took 18 months for Rob to have paperwork put through on something that should have taken a matter of weeks. And it took 18 months due to the way that the system is just not set up to do this. It's not set up to do it. So while it sounds absolutely amazing that we're going to have this whole wrath of people who are going to reach this 5-year point, if the system isn't set up to deal with that, all that's going to do is create additional frustration.
And an additional burden on like the staff and the people that are going to have to take a look at this and work this process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you're sitting inside and you're sort of thinking about that and you're thinking, right, okay, that's important and that's addressed and that's done. But in reality, if that doesn't happen and people get frustrated, as you said before, you know, you said you could skip a bus fare and end up back inside. You don't even have to commit a crime to end up back inside on this. You can just do something that someone thinks is intimidating, offensive, and when you're wound up, when you're agitated, when you're frustrated, every single person sat inside this room and every single person who does this, I refuse to believe that we do not all have that little moment when we have a little whoa, hang on a second. We all have got that, and unfortunately
you can't afford it.
You can't afford it. And you can't, even if the whole thing's put against you, you can't afford it, you know. And I watched what happened to Rob, and I logged it like you wouldn't believe. It was like I feel I had an award for it. It should have been documented to my document, and it was phenomenal. Just the error after error after error was made. He was frightened to address that because he knew if he addressed it, then there was a strong chance. If he upset his break, or she said, well, hang on a sec, you're coming across, you're being intimidating, etc., etc.
He
could be back inside. So we had to ride it out.
But it is credit to you. You've done like an amazing job, and you know, for Rob and for people like Rob having you, it's a massive help. And obviously there are people that don't. So these things, you know, there needs to be change before it can be like accepted. A massive thank you to both of you for joining us today. Like, you've been incredible, and I'm sure everyone has thought that. So thank you very much.
Take it in.
Seriously, thank you. A massive thank you to you guys. No, seriously, for the energy that you brought, the love that you've shown, the interest you've shown. You guys have been an incredible live audience. So thank you very much. And of course, to everybody listening, a massive thank you to you guys too. Yeah, special thanks to Greenwich University for hosting us today. As you know, this is going to be available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on National Prison Radio. And socials.
Yes.
But their socials too.
Yes.
Don't
Ungripped.
forget. Yeah.
Where can we find Ungripped?
Where can you find Ungrip?
Yeah.
X or Twitter, or whichever it's supposed to be. I think the most important thing to do, so I feel like I really need to put this out.
Yes, please.
because everyone is, if you want to help, this is totally in your field of being able to help without putting yourself out too majorly. If you go onto the Ungrip website, you'll see everything that we do, campaigning data, everything. On there is templates for you to send out to your MP. You do not have to have someone who is on IPP to write to your MP to say you are upset about IPP and you want them to address IPP. The more letters they receive, the more pressure it adds, the more like we are to get it raised in Parliament, the more like we are to push the change. Yeah. And the more that is done, the more likely we are to get to, which was the source of the golden point of this, which is to re-sentence people. If anything you've heard today or listened to or seen has made you think, do you know what, this isn't right, well, you're right, it isn't right. But just sitting on your hands and thinking it isn't right is not enough. Yeah. There are people in custody that need you to do this. There are people on the outside that need you to do this. There are family members that need you to do this. We are doing our bit as family members, but we need people outside of this sentence to join us and understand how important it is to get this change through. We're asking for people to support us on something that is so unbelievably unfair and unjust. So if you could do that, please tell other people about it. Please pass it on to anyone else in this university network, anyone else at all, your friends, your families. The more pressure, the more chance we've got of implementing the changes for people who are trapped by this at the moment.
Thank you. Well said. Yeah. Well said, Sarah.
Thank you.
And you can find details about Ungrip in our show notes, as well as search for us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. It's X. At After Prison Pod. So once again, thank you again.
Thank you.
Well done, Jules.
Well done.
Well done, you
Don't
guys.
forget to like, share, subscribe. Thank you.
All of that good stuff.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Since we recorded this episode at the beginning of November 2023, the government have announced some new changes to IPP sentences. These changes mean that IPP prisoners can now apply to the parole board to have their sentence terminated 3 years after release rather than the current 10. Even if that application is declined, sentences will automatically terminate after another 2 years if they are not recalled to prison during that time. There are around 1,800 people currently out on licence in the community who this applies to, meaning that once the legislation comes into effect, these people will have their sentence immediately terminated. While this is a step in the right direction, it doesn't do anything for the almost 3,000 people currently inside on this sentence with no mention of resentencing. Campaign groups such as Ungrip and IPP Committee in Action, among others, continue to campaign for resentencing.